Good afternoon and welcome to Big Thinking. Bon après-midi et bienvenue à notre série de causeries voix grand. My name is Gabriel Miller and I'm the president and CEO of the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, the national voice for over 90,000 researchers in Canada. The Federation's membership comprises over 160 universities and scholarly associations across the country. Today's event will take place in English with simultaneous interpretation into French. L'événement d'aujourd'hui se déroule en anglais avec interprétation simultanée en français. To begin with, I would like to acknowledge that the Federation office and most of the staff are located on unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Federation board members, speakers, and audience members for today's event are participating from across the country. So we extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. The Big Thinking lecture series creates opportunities for researchers to challenge and inspire policymakers, citizens, scholars, the media, and community members on the critical questions of our time. We are very excited to be presenting today's event, Canada's Hidden Cooperative System, the legacy of the Black banker ladies, with Dr. Caroline Hossein. Today's talk will expose an often unseen and yet integral piece of the Canadian economy that supports the needs and goals of communities across the country. Dr. Hossein will spotlight how these mutual aid networks are akin to more familiar cooperatives and will challenge us to think about the value such systems could bring to Canadian international development policy. Indeed, this is a timely conversation as we struggle through the pandemic and recognize the serious economic impacts of COVID-19 on already marginalized communities. This presentation will give us an alternative way to think about development support now and as we look forward to rebuilding after the pandemic. Today's audience includes researchers, finance professionals, policymakers, and representatives from nonprofits, among others. We're happy to have you all with us today. A few housekeeping notes for this virtual Big Thinking before we begin. After Dr. Hossein's talk, there will be a brief conversation with our moderator, after which Dr. Hossein will be able to answer a few questions from the audience. You can submit your questions by typing them into the question and answer box. You can also join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag BigThinking. I'd also like to thank Big Thinking's parliamentary sponsor, Greg Fergus, MP for Hull Elmer, and I would especially like to thank our friends and partners at the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for their continued support of the Big Thinking series. We are pleased to have with us today Ted Hewitt, president of SSHRC, and I will now give the floor to Ted to introduce today's speaker. Merci à toutes et tous, et je vous souhaite une bonne causerie voix grand.
Thanks, Gabe. Great to see you again today. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier la Fédération d'offrir la série Voix grand en ligne durant la pandémie. Ces événements permettent à certains des plus brillants esprits de la communauté de recherche en sciences humaines du Canada de partager le point de vue et d'engager un dialogue avec les principales parties prenantes de tous les secteurs, y compris les responsabilités d'élaboration des politiques, les dirigeants d'entreprises et les dirigeants communautaire. Before I introduce today's featured speaker, Dr. Caroline Hossein, I'd like to present another special guest who will moderate today's discussion following the presentation. Dr. Roberta Rice is Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Calgary. Since 2011, she's led several SSHRC-funded research projects to support her work on Indigenous politics in Latin America and Canada. So thank you for being here with us today, Dr. Rice. Over the past year, COVID-19 has created profound shifts in society, in the way we work, the way we study, the way we play, and how we individually and collectively seek to maintain our well-being and that of others. The global crisis has also exposed and increased social and cultural inequities embedded in our societies. In times like these, research in the social sciences and humanities is more important than ever. It generates insights to help address the complex issues the crisis has laid bare and to find solutions that will strengthen Canadian society. Le CRSH est fier d'appuyer des chercheurs comme notre conférencière vedette d'aujourd'hui. Caroline Hossein est professeure agrégée en affaires et en société au département de sciences sociales de l'Université York. Au cours des dernières années, elle a dirigé un projet pluriannuel financé par le CRSH qui portait sur les origines africaines de l'économie sociale. Dr. Hossein is also the founder of the Diverse Solidarity Economies Collective, which brings together a growing number of non-white women activists and scholars internationally, leading work to ensure that racialized women are acknowledged and to build a space for culturally diverse community economies. Dr. Hussein's research on Black banker ladies, a financial exchange system based on ancient African traditions, is leading us to understand how Canadian informal cooperative institutions can help build an inclusive economy and bridge the inequity gap in Canada. We look forward to hearing more details about your work, so thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Hossein.
Thank you to the Federation for inviting me to deliver the Big Thinking on the Hill lecture. I'm most grateful to Dr. Hewitt for this generous introduction, so thank you, Shirk. I'd like to start by saying a country acknowledgement. I'm grateful to live, work, and play on unceded Indigenous lands, and I thank all of the Aboriginal people in Canada for letting us do so. I want to also remember that many people of African descent have helped build these lands here in Canada and across the Americas. And as a scholar of African descent, I want to find ways to build alliances between Black and Indigenous people. My name is Caroline Shenaz Hossein, and I'm a professor of business and society at York University in Toronto. My work is funded by the Shirk and the Early Researcher Award from the province of Ontario. I am the founder of the Diverse Solidarity Economies Collective, a group of scholars working to decolonize economics, so please check them out. How many of you have heard of Ajo, Osusu, Sanduk, Patna, Chit, Arisan? These cultural names, which also include Susu and Chitu, are known by academics as rotating savings and credit associations, or ROSCAs for short. And this is what I'll speak about today. ROSCAs are hidden cooperatives that many Black and immigrant people practice all over the world, including right here in Canada. For the past 14 years, I have been studying and writing on development, financial exclusion, cooperative economies, especially for the African diaspora. Before becoming an academic, I worked as a practitioner in the field of international development for most of a decade. I was influenced by an international NGO out of Philadelphia, OIC International. This NGO was led by African Americans and founded by the great Leon Sullivan, a civil rights activist. There you have it. I was this Canadian managing global economic development programs for OIC. And what I learned from African Americans was how to do business equitably, how to co-opt aid and be mindful of the biased allocations of money. This teaching resonated with me because I bear witness to the indignities my own family has suffered when my parents emigrated 50 years ago to Toronto from the Caribbean. Growing up in the GTA, we crisscrossed in a number of Caribbean and ethnic communities, such as Malvern in the east, Downsview in the west, Richmond Hill, York region. And just before I graduated from high school, my parents found a footing in Vaughan, just north of the city of Toronto. My story is a common one for many Black Canadians and newcomers where precarity is the norm. But the solidarity economy and counting on those you know and trust was also my norm. I confess that ROSCAs are not new to me. My great-grandmother, Maud Gittins, was a Grenadian street food vendor who lived in Sandy Grande, Trinidad, but she was also a well-known banker lady of a susu. Susu is a local name for a ROSCA, and that name originates in Ghana, West Africa. And susu can be found among the African diaspora outside of Africa and the Caribbean, so right here in Canada. These ROSCAs are at the very core of the Canadian social economy. Susus and the many names they are called are embedded in civil society. I've been teaching and writing on ROSCAs for about a decade. They are self-managed voluntary co-ops practiced around the world. ROSCAs are usually described in a local vernacular. Somali Ayutu, Jamaican Patna, Indian Chit, Guyanese Boxhand, Haitian Soul, and Chinese Hua. Then there are Itiga for Kenyans, Rounds in Zimbabwe, Ekub for Eritreans and Ethiopians, and Tandas for many people in Latin America. And the list goes on. When people come here to live, they organize these ROSCAs from around the world. It's a way they can help each other financially. And the women who manage these co-ops are concerned about social supports and kindness, wanting to give people a place to belong. In 2007, I was researching a type of development finance known as microfinance. In 5 Caribbean countries, I interviewed over 500 people for my book, Politicized Microfinance. And I found that professionalized financial systems concerned about poverty alleviation were limited in what they could do. Cooperative banks are the ones closing the gaps on inequities. This is especially true for ROSCAs. These informal groups are managed by people who share the same socioeconomic class and who are alienated from goods and services. ROSCA members decide how their co-ops will be structured. In the groups, members contribute a hand, which is a fixed sum of money contributed in a cycle, a weekly or monthly basis, to a pool. And that lump sum of money from the pool is collected, then shared in turn to a member. Canadian women who organize ROSCAs call themselves the banker ladies, and they adhere to the same principles as other cooperators. My work on solidarity economies is correcting the erasure of the contributions of people of African descent in the cooperative sector here in Canada and elsewhere. I teach my students about cooperatives, nonprofits, social enterprises, and mutual aid, so they can go out into the world and make business inclusive. I'm proud to say that I see many of them disrupting conventional business practice here in Canada and internationally. Most of York's 50,000 students are Canadians who represent dozens of countries in the global South. They do not see development as a one-way dialogue. They see that our development agenda is long overdue for a redesign that is mindful of non-Western expertise in how we do local economic development. My research is smashing up the binaries of South, North, or of left versus right. It pushes us all to think about feminist futures and the theory of community economies. Feminist scholars J.K. Gibson Graham and CERN, the Community Economies Research Network, reject the fixation on the capitalist firm as the sole unit of analysis for how to conduct business. They liken this Western bias to an iceberg, where the capitalist firm is the very small, visible part of the iceberg we actually see. And most of life's interactions in the market and life are the submerged part, hidden away. Community economies have always been around. So much of our self-provisioning on this planet is beneath the surface. What is important here is that these diverse community economies can politicize cooperation in such a way that we can undo the exclusions occurring in our world. The Black political economy has an endless supply of knowledge making for cooperativism. It should be reread this way because of its insistence on addressing issues of racial capitalism. As a Black feminist scholar, I am steeped in this idea of community economies, cooperatives, and solidarity economies, along with intersectionality. Development cannot be the stage's linear project that assumes that all groups can interact with the state and private sector. Many people of African descent are being harmed, and as a result, they self-exclude. If the COVID-19 pandemic has taught any of us anything, it should be that the future of giving and aid requires a new design, one that is thoughtful, more efficient, and mindful of the knowledge and the expertise beyond white experts. This is why my theory on the Black social economy is useful. It draws on Black feminist concepts of lived experience and intersectionality to see the interlocking oppressions occurring in our economic and social lives. Legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw coined the concept intersectionality. She made it clear to us way back in 1989 that the laws were ignorant of the double bind of being both Black and female. To counter those inequities, the Black social economy argues historically oppressed people of African descent must politicize their networks in ways to combat exclusion. To animate the Black social economy, the banker ladies are living proof that there is what Karl Polanyi referred to as a double movement. And there is a quiet resistance taking place. Black feminist thought is the way we will arrive at knowing what the Black social economy is. It is the way to consider the thousands of Black and racialized women in this country who lead co-ops and who are remaking economies in spite of the traumas they endure every day. Yet, scholarship on the Canadian social economy does not view marginalized women as its chief architects. Marginalized women, and especially Black women, are usually studied down in Canada, and we only analyze them as being on the receiving end of aid. The Black social economy pushes back against this very one-dimensional view. Economics professor Nina Banks at Bucknell University argues that it's time to value community work of African American women. Professor Jessica Gordon-Nemhard of CUNY reminds us about people's innovations in cooperatives that are both formal and informal. Marcus Garvey created the world's largest member-owned institution, UNIA, to promote humanity. I concur with all of these findings for Canada. The Black women I interviewed show that they make space in our economies through cooperatives for alienated citizens, and they ask for nothing in return. I spent more than 3 years in the cities of Toronto and Montreal interviewing banker ladies, from Rexdale in the west to Scarborough in the GTA to Little Burgundy and Papineau in the east in Montreal. These women actually represent thousands more women because each banker lady represents the members of her group, and these can range from 8 to 80 members. I met a Cameroon Jangji in Toronto who had more than 1,000 members spread across Canada. It should be remembered that these banker ladies who organize co-ops refuse to sit idly by waiting on handouts. They contribute as cooperators to make our world a better place. Our banker ladies hold the key to underdevelopment. This is in part because they are consciously redefining what they do. They use group consensus and mutual aid to help those who are discriminated against or who feel like they don't belong anywhere. This work they do builds up civic life. But there's a divergence. The Canadian case diverges from the 300 plus Caribbean banker ladies I already interviewed. These women the Caribbean banker ladies, as well as the women I interviewed in Ghana and Ethiopia, are living in societies where people recognize and appreciate their banker ladies. In Canada, though, ROSCAs remain hidden. Caribbean banker ladies are valued for the contributions they make, and elite bankers in Jamaica will roll out the Patna Plan, product lines to mimic these innovations. Haitian bankers do the same with Mama Sol. But this is not happening in Canada. The divergence or complication is not in the mechanics of how ROSCAs work. ROSCA's structure vary depending on every group. But the difference is in the lack of acknowledging these systems in Canada. We see a spate of Black, Indigenous, and Muslim Canadians discriminated against when they go into formal banks to carry out mundane transactions. To respond, Canada's banker ladies are the cooperators who reach out to these Canadians, but they are ignored. More than this, they are even vilified. They are called terrorists, gamblers, drug dealers, money launderers, pyramid schemers engaged in illicit activities. Many Canadian banker ladies fear the government and the police. Police confiscate their goods, and when they raid their apartment blocks, they don't even listen to the women's explanations that this money is for a ROSCA. This is why we made a film, The Banker Ladies, because the banker ladies want to change mindsets about what they do. They no longer want to feel that what they do is illegal or wrong. They're tired of hiding. They will show you in this short trailer that they have the power.
But also, so if you have it in your country, you still bring it. So when you go, you meet people from your country, you say, oh, you remember Osusu? They say, yes. You remember when we used to read back home? So why don't we do it back?
So we developed a structure that was different, slightly different than the one that my mom and her friends used.
A youth taught me help. When we have a group of 10 of women to $200, I get the $2,000.
That makes me independent. I feel a power. So I have something.
And so, this African tradition, ROSCA, rooted in Ujamaa, Combit, Ubuntu, which has helped so many people here in Canada for more than 100 years, remains unknown. Starting with the Underground Railroad, this was a cooperative, and the collectives or ROSCAs that people used in secret to set up life in Canada were called true bands. It is no longer reasonable for us to pretend that they don't exist or to say we don't see what they do. What these women are doing is using their after-tax incomes to pool and gift each other funds that they may need to start a new business, pay for tuition for their children, or to buy a used car. One woman in Rexdale confided to me that her provincial election campaign was mostly funded by Ayutu, a Somali ROSCA. ROSCAs are rooted in friendship and mutual aid. They follow our cooperative values. These ROSCAs are legitimate informal institutions, and they follow the same path as early co-ops in Canada. Canada has a rich legacy of cooperatives. In the early 1900s in Lévis, Quebec, the Caisse Populaire were created in a moment of crisis by a French Catholic minority who felt excluded by Protestant Anglophones. This is what is now known around the globe as Desjardins. Desjardins started off informally. Today, Quebec's economies sociale is revered as a model for all to learn about. As an undergraduate student at St. Mary's University in Halifax, I learned about the Antigonish movement. It also started off informally, as fisherfolk gathered around kitchen tables to imagine a world of cooperativism to counter the spread of commercialized fishing. Today, the University of St. FX the Coady Institute is an important site for learning about Canadian cooperatives, and international visitors come yearly to hear about that legacy. Yet, we don't teach the world about the Black banker ladies. Now that COVID-19 has revived the rebirth of mutual aid, we see the value of informally cooperating. Stories of neighbors helping each other are the most cherished ones we tell through this lockdown. It is time to acknowledge the varied forms of cooperativism, such as mutual aid, self-help groups, and ROSCAs, and to recognize they are important in making a strong civil society. None of these forms of economic cooperation are new to Black people in this country. They are a way of life. The global pandemic has illuminated systemic inequities and anti-Black racism. We now understand why Black Canadians, especially women, would seek refuge in the solidarity economy and set up their own money-pooling cooperative systems out of sight. ROSCAs among the diaspora are an innovation. The banker ladies address underbanking and ensure we have cohesion in society. They are repairing the harms of anti-Black racism. Many of the women I interviewed are engaged in small catering businesses. Others are school bus drivers, cleaners, retail clerks, and grocery store employees. We call these women essential workers, but we don't pay them properly for the hazardous work they do. We refuse to see the work they do, and we do not hire them for their community building expertise. Instead, we stigmatize them. ROSCAs teach all of us that solidarity matters. And the banker ladies teach us not to rely solely on a charitable model. Voluntary, formal nonprofits here in Canada and around the world have had a colonizing history on people. Even our well-financed, well-intentioned nonprofits are mainly white and led by people completely detached from the lived experience of the very people they claim to help. We need to invest in the Black women cooperators who understand concepts of trust and reciprocity, which are fundamental to rebuilding equitable economies. Many political elites and policymakers are grappling with their own complicity in anti-Black racism. But the banker ladies can correct these bias systems and show us how to dismantle them. Look at this quote by Fardosa. It gives you some insight into that. I'm calling on decision makers and policy influencers to directly fund the banker ladies. Hire them as community development experts because they know how to do this work. No outside expert with zero lived experience can do this work. How can we say we know about financial inclusion in our world and give out master lessons to the Global South when we ignore marginalized women in this world who have been organizing ROSCAs for more than 100 years? ROSCAs prioritize the voices of their members. Members' deliberation is key to making people feel valued in society. Together with the government, I call on all our cooperative institutions, credit unions, to fund and set up a ROSCA network and to make it a global one that is committed to promoting mutual aid and cooperativism run by the banker ladies of Canada, Black and immigrant women who know these systems. This global ROSCA focused on Black women's lived experiences will benefit all Canadian women. There are two proven models that can be useful for Canada. The first is the state of Kerala, India, and the second is Ghana, West Africa. Both places recognize ROSCAs, self-help groups, and mutual aid as valuable to society and to business, and have incorporated them. In India, the state has acknowledged chit funds and has had laws on the books since the 1800s. But it is the Kerala model in South India that Canada should take note of. First, know that the state of Kerala is one of the world's most impressive places when it comes to gender equality, self-help groups, and cooperatives. Leaders in Kerala have listened to marginalized women, and in 1998, the Kundambashri program was launched. In this program, Sanghas, which are women collectives, were organized and brought into economic plans. Kerala did the unthinkable by making women collectives part of a regional development agenda. It seemed unlikely to succeed because of the hidden nature of these groups, but the state was determined and put in the necessary resources to rebuild inclusively. Kundambashri has been replicated where there has been trouble with equity. We can do Kundambashri in Canada. My collaborators and I are working on how the Kundambashri model can benefit Black and diaspora Canadians. The second model, as I said before, is Ghana. The Ghanaian people, for centuries, have been experts on Susu. Premier economists from the country have worked with its central bank to ensure that a segment of the Susu system is included in the retail banking system. With my colleague in Ghana, we recently examined the formal aspects of the Susu system, and the Ghana Cooperative Susu and Collectors Association, a national network, came to speak to the banker ladies in Toronto in 2018. The important aspect of making this work will be for the state to make sure there is trust with the women of Canada. We have a lot to learn from Ghana and Kerala. The Global South can bring development expertise to us in the ways we do community economic development, CED. We can amplify the role of our banker ladies as we create a global ROSCA network. We need to fund the banker ladies for our own social development, as well as to advise global affairs about development finance. To conclude, there is value in diversifying our solidarity economies. We need to make space in the cooperative sector for ROSCAs, that is, for self-help and mutual aid groups carried out by Black and racialized people in this country. The new big thinking today is that we have Black women, known as the banker ladies, who continue to help grow cooperativism in this country. To create our Global ROSCA Network, we also need to learn from the Global South, from Kerala's Kundambashri movement and Ghana's Susu system. We can rethink our cooperative traditions by hiring the banker ladies and drawing on their centuries-old expertise in tackling business exclusion through cooperatives. Bring the banker ladies out of hiding and thank these women leaders across Canada for continuing our legacy of cooperatives. I thank you for listening to me today.
Great. Hi, Dr. Hossein. Thank you so much for that thought-provoking lecture on a dynamic that has certainly been hidden in plain sight from mainstream Canadians. And I would like to invite the audience to ask their questions through the Q&A function. I already see a number of them, and I hope we can get to all of them. But first, I'd like to pose some questions for you as the moderator. Your discussion touched on a number of topics that are central to development studies, yet are not commonly thought of as pertaining to Canada. For instance, the role of informal cooperative economies is central to economic development in the Global South. Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto is well known for his work on the informal sector and on the importance of business and property rights for marginalized communities. Specifically, he has argued that granting land titles to informal housing settlements and permits to informal businesses would give the poor a stake in the economy and unleash their entrepreneurial potential with positive spin-off effects for the national economy. In contrast, in Canada, as we know, the informal economy tends to be equated with illegality. So what explains these differing perceptions of the informal economy in the global North and global South? And how can we remove this stigma in the Canadian context?
Thank you, Dr. Rice, for that question. So I'll start off by saying that probably the rest of the world may not agree with us here that equating informality to illegality makes any sense. And while economist De Soto has this view that the informal is this untapped market for turning people into these kind of rational economic subjects, I mean, this was said with the bottom of the pyramid ideas of C.K. Prahalad. The banker ladies are actually trying to do something really different. And what they're doing is pragmatic work that they locate in the informal so that they can really push for cooperative economics to think about business more equitably. And this is not so strange to us, and it should be something that we're familiar with in Canada, because there's a well-known Guyanese economist by the name of C.Y. Thomas, who has argued for a very long time about this convergence theory, which is basically, just to boil it down, is speaking about doing self-sufficiency on a local grassroots level that is really considerate of people's needs and not getting lost in this big world system that actually alienates disadvantaged peoples and countries. Canadian economist, the late John Loxley, actually credited Professor C.Y. Thomas for his self-sufficiency influence on Canada's economic development principles. They're known as the Nietzsche principles, and I'm not sure if you know, but the Nietzsche principles is named after an Indigenous worker co-op who actually grounded Canada's economic development program in these set of principles that are really focused on the local. And sometimes that means going informally. There's a Canadian national network called SEDNet that focuses on this. And maybe there's something that we need to look at there because we're actually understanding informal counts. And I think if we take our cues from the Kundumbashery system in India, they tell us to get over our Western complex about informal not being good for society and to think about something called varieties cooperativism.
Thank you for that. I can see our Q&A is starting to blow up a little bit. That's great. If I may, I'm also really fascinated on this discussion of how to link sort of formal and informal institutions in a way that improves life for everybody by making business inclusive. And in my own research, I'm interested in how to make democracy inclusive by including, for example, Indigenous people's voices, perspectives, and interests in a way that improves the quality of representation for all citizens. And I find that institutional innovation is crucial for making democracy work for everyone. And that includes the recognition and respect for traditional and adapted Indigenous governance structures, such as customary laws and practices, which I refer to as non-formal institutions because they're neither formally recognized by the state, but they're not informal either. So what are some of the practical steps that Canadian policymakers can take to support the Black banker ladies in our communities?
Yeah. Okay. So there's probably many, but I'm going to try and do it in a really short time because I know people want to ask questions. But the first thing I want to say, I'm going to give you three, but the first thing I'm going to say is that I think there has to be political will to support cooperatives in this country. There's a bias towards capitalist and commercial firms, and we have to remember that Canada's gift to the world are co-ops, are cooperatives. But yet we have business schools who are obsessed with teaching commercial firms. We don't teach our children in the school system anything about cooperatives and Desjardins. I mean, this is our legacy. So three things that can support banker ladies. One is what I mentioned, is that we need to create a ROSCA network, something that's global, and to fund that, and to train and build capacity of people who are doing this work already on the ground. Hire the banker ladies as community economic development experts. Give them paid positions so that they can lead this work when we're doing economic development in our country. Don't just consult them and extract information from them and then do it on our own. Actually incorporate them as part of the programmings that we do. And then thirdly, what I'd say is hopefully we can all meet in real life. But I think we need a symposium of some sort to have a national dialogue, reach out to Black, Indigenous, and racialized women scholars who are working on CED activities, who are doing empirical work in Canada and elsewhere, who can bring the banker ladies and community activists that they know who are doing this work among immigrant, racialized, and Black women. And I know there are many of them doing that across Canada, and we have to start valuing that expertise among Black women academics.
Really a very exciting research area that you're working in. Another question, we are in a moment when the Black Lives Matter movement has become one of the most powerful social movements in North America, as we know. Given the attention on racial and justice and equity, is not surprising then that there's growing public interest in supporting local Black-owned businesses. And I'm interested in that relationship between the two. But what can banks or government agencies do to make sure that the Black banker ladies are not further marginalized in this move?
Yeah, and I think it boils down to trust. We need to build trust with Black and racialized women in this country. We need to hear what they're saying about business exclusion. Policymakers need to do some homework to learn about what ROSCAs are, train them, get the police and people who don't understand what ROSCAs are so that these women are not being victimized and their money's being confiscated. The Shirk-funded film called The Banker Ladies might be one place to start to educate, but we can also tap into our media, diversify our media, get those stories told. Last fall, Vicky McComa wrote a great story in The Walrus about, collectives and informal sort of cooperatives that I think people should read these kind of things, but we need to diversify and educate to seep into the Canadian consciousness. But I think the state needs to make the Banker Ladies of Canada a national policy. I think we've done lots of work with the Black Entrepreneurship Fund, so kudos to everyone doing that. But it should be said that a lot of community activists, particularly out of Montreal, have been pushing for this for a very long time. I think they have this organization called FACE right now. It's relatively new. It's the Federation of African Canadian Economics. Hopefully someone will spread that up, send that up as a link, because I think that what they're doing is something really important to try to diversify finance. But I also want to have bankers be aware that they should be funding cooperative institutions. I'm encouraged and heartened by Black Lives Matter Canada has just launched a mutual aid platform. So just to speak to what you just mentioned as a social movement, they're also thinking about funding from within, because they know that to do this revolution, to really change things, we need to self-finance some of this stuff. But I think that also Black Lives Matter in Canada will have to be different from those in the US, because cooperatives have not been diversified in our country, unlike in the US context. So I think that the Black Lives Matter is going to have to partner with these Banker Ladies of Canada.
Thank you for that. And I would like to call the audience's attention to the chat. You can see a link to an open access paper, but as well as the link to the Banker Ladies film, which I'm looking forward to bringing into the classroom for my students here in Alberta, and also your website. So please check out those links. And my final question before we get to the audience is, what would you say is the greatest legacy of the Black Banker Ladies in Canadian society?
The legacy of the Banker Ladies of Canada is that they tell us about something called varieties cooperatives in our world. They're also reminding us that Global South people are the ones who are innovating in things like mutual aid and equitable finance, and they've been doing this for centuries. I think we have a huge debt to these women across the country.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I see 26 questions. So we won't get to all of them, but we have about 10 minutes. So 27 now. So I'm going to start.
Folks can email me too.
That's very generous. So the first question, what are the 3 factors that help determine the success of a ROSCA group? And what are the risks and how do you address them, I guess, in your work? So what are the factors that help determine the success of the ROSCA group and some of the risks involved in it, and how do you address or mitigate
Yeah,
those?
it's a good question. So, we can talk about all the positives in ROSCAs. And I should say that there's been lots of studies on this in a number of countries around the world. And the ROSCAs always top in terms of financial devices that people use. It tends to be the most sacred of finances that people use because of exclusion has been so intense for certain groups of people. But there are some real risks, right? The everyday risks usually are things around favoritism. Some people feel that they haven't accessed their monies in a timely fashion, and that can hurt them if their business is seasonal. There are also risks about monies being absconded. This is on a low level risk, but sometimes this can happen. People make mistakes, especially if there's a lot of head counting going on with the ROSCAs. So there are some risks, but I have to tell you that compliance is incredibly high. I've met with I had focus groups just looking at people who've been harmed by ROSCAs or burned by them. And women come out in the droves to tell me some of the, things that do happen. But then the same women who tell you those stories are still actively engaged in ROSCAs. But they understand that there are risks when you do something informal. That's why it's so important to have, for a subset of them, they're going to want to have some formality or at least to be recognized. But there are a number of risks that do occur when you have informal institutions, no doubt. But again, the banker ladies, it was really hard to pull that from them because, they're very defensive of these systems, particularly because they've been so marginalized from conventional banking systems. What was the other question?
About the risk and how do you mitigate it, or how do you address them in your work, I guess, as you're doing research with the Black banker ladies? Like, how do you make sure you're not sort of harming them by exposing them maybe to risk?
Oh, okay. So if it's ethics, I usually clear ethics for that kind of thing. I thought it was risk around the ROSCAs themselves, but sorry, I
think that question might be around the risk of ROSCAs, but I also think for academics interested in doing this,
what's important here is to go through a very rigorous ethics protocol because we are dealing with women who are very vulnerable in our society. And actually, so many of them can't be on this call today because there is a digital divide. They don't have access to internet in their homes. I mean, this is really tragic that we live in a place like Canada and we undermine the work that they're doing, and we're not tapping into their expertise in community development, and they could be having really interesting ways of helping us move forward. So for me, it's very important. I take ethics extremely seriously. I go through the rigor of doing it. I share all my tools with ethics review boards, and it does take a long time because of the group that I'm working with.
Yes, that's great. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Another interesting question here: if the ROSCAs are brought into the mainstream of the political economy, isn't there a possibility that their character and goals will change in a way that could be detrimental to the project?
Wow, that's a great question. That's probably part of the reason why I can't finish my book at times, because I am toying with this idea. So you should know that I actually asked these hundreds of banker ladies about that question, that same question. If you bring banker ladies into the formal mainstream part, have a Banker Ladies of Canada, will that jeopardize the very thing that they're doing? And the answer is that, it's tricky. That's a tricky question for me to answer because I actually side on that group that is very vocal, that really want to maintain informality. And the truth of it is that we need to look at the Ghana Susu system. They've regulated the system, but a very tiny part of their system is regulated. And that's because these kinds of ROSCAs, which are actually, they grow out of the informal, will be very hard to regulate and to force into any kind of mainstream system unless they want it. So we might have to use a pragmatic system like the Ghana system, where the vast majority of ROSCAs remain informal, and those who see benefits to being more protected can negotiate that. So I'm also concerned about too much formality, particularly for groups who have been harmed by the state and by police.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's the richness of doing so many comparative case studies in the global north and global south, where you can pull on examples of cases where different innovative experiments are underway, what worked, what didn't in your generalization. So I think that that's an advantage of doing comparative research. There's a question about intergenerational issues, which I think would be great to bring in. How is the ROSCA movement integrating young Black women to get involved? And is there intergenerational work being done?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. That's excellent. And I have that, whoever asked that question, please come and do more work with me, because that's actually, I wish someone would do that project. There, I am starting to see lots of young women. So people I interview can be anywhere from, about in their mid-20s to as old as 60, 70, 80, years old, seniors. So there's a huge gamut of people that participate. I tend to focus mostly on women who are really full-time, they're working, they're involved in some sort of, productive activity, mostly full-time. But intergenerational, what I'm seeing is that we have a lot of young people, and particularly I did some focus groups specifically with the Somali community, Sudanese, Muslim women, because so many of them, if you're practicing, cannot borrow monies from a bank because of the interest associated. Our bankers haven't even figured out how to make lending much more inclusive to groups of people who can't borrow loans because of religious reasons. So what you're finding is that a lot of young people they're actually much more eager, and they tell me that we have to formalize ROSCAs. As far out, I hear from people in Prince Edward Island, in Calgary, all over Toronto and Montreal, and they're actually into like the e-banking for ROSCAs. And sometimes they find a lot of trouble with making deposits in and out because banks don't understand what they're up to, and they will freeze their accounts. So what I'm finding is really interesting is that my banker ladies tend to stay clear of a lot of online formal banking stuff, and they still like the face-to-face. But the younger generation is really engaged with e-banking and online banking for these kinds of systems, which is really terrific to see. And we need to explore more work on fintech when it comes to ROSCAs.
Interesting. That's sort of the next generation of research.
Yeah, that's right. Someone else is doing that.
I also have to point out there are a lot of hellos and thank yous from around the world coming in.
Oh.
Yeah, Aeroterra, New Zealand, a great question, saying fantastic presentation. This individual is wondering if when the women go on to use ROSCAs to create businesses, do they create co-op type businesses? And does the cooperativism in ROSCAs translate into the businesses created, right? Is there sort of a positive link between that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm studying right now. I'm so focused on what ROSCAs are, but I do get involved when they're talking to me about, especially on one-on-one, about what businesses they do start. So many of the women are, some have formal employment, as you know, many are precariously employed, so they have sideline businesses. But yeah, some are self-employed, and a number of them are engaged in partnerships or sort of cooperative type of enterprises where they join together And they could have a catering business, for example, or they have some sort of hairdressing or cleaning business. Some of them will come together because pooling the resources to start that business kind of makes sense. And also, too, the ROSCAs facilitate that kind of networking, if you want to call it that. And that's what's so beautiful about these ROSCA systems. It's a place to get money, but it's also a place to kind of strategize. It's a place to also find a place that you can just gossip and talk about stuff that doesn't work for you. And I think that ROSCA enterprises are happening where that's possible. But so many of them have family-owned businesses, whether it's sewing or making food or hairdressing, and it's family-owned businesses but family-owned businesses that are socially conscious. I wouldn't say that they're like your typical firm. They're socially conscious firms that are thinking about a double bottom line.
Nice. And that brings me to the next question. Well, it's really, I just wanted to highlight what the individual was saying, and that she wanted to underscore how important Dr. Hossein's policy recommendations are, and that they're transformative towards a more thoughtful and sustainable future, right? That's sort of how to do business differently and better. And another comment was, or question, how do we ensure that the Black banker ladies model does not get consumed by Black capitalism, right? So it seems that the audience is interested in how to make a different future, right? To do business inclusive, but also differently.
Yeah, that's a big question. And that's why I think your question when we were talking kind of hit that, right? Like there's been this Black Entrepreneurship Fund, which is phenomenal for Black people in Canada. We're pleased by that. But we have to remain steadfast in knowing that the firm and capitalism, the whole idea of Cedric Robinson's work around racial capitalism has questioned the intentions of extreme versions of capitalism and what the marketplace does to people of color, particularly those who are of African descent. And so, yeah, there is a tension within the Black community of those who are Black liberals really supportive of capitalist system as a way to trickle down. But I'm really a proponent of us pushing back against that and to kind of listen. Do we hear the banker ladies in what they're saying? What they're saying is that we need something much more collective, or at least if you're going to do business, make sure it's kind of like a social enterprise in that it's thinking about a double or triple bottom line that involves people, planet, and money. Because I do think that they're thinking a little bit more inclusively about how to earn a living, and that it's not just about making money, but it's also about making things better for all of us.
That's why I enjoyed your talk, because it gives us other possibilities that we might not have even considered. And I'm sorry to have to wrap up right now. There's so many other questions, but please feel free to contact Dr. Hossein. She put her website is right there. If you look in the chat, you'll be able to reach her through that. So thank you, Dr. Hossein. Your presentation and our conversation today have highlighted the importance of informal economies and the Black banker ladies to development. Thank you again, of course, to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for their support of the Big Thinking series and this event in particular. And to find out about future Big Thinking events, you can check back at the Federation website, subscribe to the newsletter, and follow them on social media. And we look forward to future Big Thinking events with excellent and inspirational scholars as Dr. Hossein. And I want to thank everyone for coming out today. And I can still see the questions going in the Q&A, and I hope in some other way we can address some of them.
Thank you, Dr. Rice, and thank you everyone for coming. We are most humbled. Let us remember the banker ladies.